High above war-torn Europe, the cockpit was a furnace of noise and fear, a tiny, fragile world suspended between life and death. Engines screamed at full throttle, the metallic rattle of 50-caliber guns echoing through the fuselage like thunder trapped in a cage. Oxygen hissed through rubber masks as pilots gasped against the altitude, their voices lost in static-filled radios. Outside, the sky was a graveyard, streaks of smoke, flashes of flak, silver bombers lumbering through the chaos while black bursts tore holes in the daylight. In that frozen, vibrating coffin of metal and glass, visibility was everything. 1 second of hesitation, one glare off the canopy, could mean the difference between a confirmed kill and a coffin draped in stars and stripes. Every pilot knew it. And yet, some of them began to do something that defied reason, logic, and every line of training they'd ever received. They slid their side windows open in the middle of combat. At 25,000 feet, that decision bordered on suicide. The outside temperature dropped to nearly minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The instant the latch clicked open, a violent gust of freezing air tore into the cockpit, slashing across their faces and clawing at their eyes. It numbed their fingers on the stick, stiffened their joints, and filled the cabin with a shrill, unending howl. It was madness, or so it seemed. But the pilots swore by it. They claimed that with the window open, they could see better, not just look, but truly see. They said the target became sharper, the world more honest. The sun's glare no longer blinded them, and the enemy's silhouette stood out clear against the clouds. Their shooting got better. Their bursts, once wide and frantic, now hit home. At first, no one believed them. Commanders called it superstition. Engineers dismissed it as adrenaline-induced nonsense. After all, who in their right mind would willingly invite sub-zero chaos into a pressurized cockpit already filled with death? But reports began to pile up. Gun camera footage showed pilots who flew open, often against orders, landing more confirmed hits. Their tracer lines stayed straighter, their bursts tighter, their aim truer. And beneath the official silence of Air Force communiques, whispers began to spread through the fighter groups. Crack the window before you fire. The truth, as it turned out, wasn't madness. It was physics. The curved plexiglass canopy that cocooned the pilot was both a shield and a curse. At certain angles, the sunlight would refract across the dome, creating faint optical distortions that tricked the eye. The shimmer, almost invisible on the ground, could bend a pilot's perception by fractions of a degree, just enough to throw off a burst of fire by yards at combat range. The glare of the European sun, bouncing off snow and cloud banks, made it even worse. When the canopy was cracked open, the distortion vanished. The cold air sliced through the haze, the reflections disappeared, and the human eye, naked, vulnerable, primal, finally saw what the machine had hidden. The pilots didn't know the science. They didn't care. All they knew was that with the wind in their face and the raw air biting their skin, their instincts sharpened. The world slowed. The target was real. They learned to trust that feeling. Before a dogfight, they'd reach up, flick the latch, and feel that blast of air like a slap from the sky. Some said it woke them up, cleared the fear, and snapped them into focus. Others said it was like touching the war itself, a ritual that reminded them they were still alive, still in control. To outsiders, it was a reckless quirk. To the men who lived it, it was survival, the difference between guessing through glass and striking with absolute certainty. And as the gun cameras rolled and the tracers burned across the sky, the evidence became undeniable. The open window wasn't a mistake. It was an edge, a hidden advantage born not from manuals or science, but from desperation, and from a flaw no engineer ever saw coming. It started in the chaos of 1943, the year when the air war over Europe reached its boiling point. Every day, hundreds of American bombers clawed their way into German airspace, escorted by sleek new fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-51 Mustang. These planes were fast, rugged, and deadly. They carried 8 50 caliber Brownings that could tear through steel and flesh alike. Yet, for all their firepower, something was wrong. Pilots returned from missions swearing they'd had perfect shots, bandits filling their gun sights, tracers blazing straight into the target. But when the gun camera footage came back, the results didn't match their memories. Burst after burst went wide. Enemy aircraft slipped through unscathed, leaving shaken gunners wondering if they were losing their edge. At first, the blame game began. Armorers checked every gun mount. Engineers recalibrated sights. Flight surgeons whispered about combat fatigue. Maybe the stress was making men flinch without realizing it. But even when the best marksmen missed, the mystery deepened. How could so many skilled pilots, trained to hit a target the size of a postage stamp at 300 miles per hour, be firing entire belts of ammunition into empty sky? The answer, it turned out, wasn't in the guns. It was in the glass. The new canopies, made of curved plexiglass for better aerodynamics and all-around visibility, looked like marvels of engineering. But under the wrong light, they betrayed their purpose. Sunlight bouncing off the clouds, scattered across the canopy's curved surface, bending the pilot's perception by tiny, almost imperceptible degrees. What looked like a perfect lead on an enemy aircraft might in reality be inches off. And at 500 yards, an inch was the difference between victory and vapor. The effect was subtle enough that most never noticed it, until a few pilots started breaking the rules. One squadron flying out of East Anglia began experimenting. They were desperate, casualties were mounting, and morale was thin. One pilot, a lieutenant known for his stubborn streak, swore he could see better with the side window open. He'd cracked it once during a dive to clear condensation, only to notice that the glare vanished instantly. The sun stopped blinding him. The target stopped shimmering. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. He kept doing it, quietly at first, not telling his superiors. Then others noticed his results. His hits climbed. His bursts grew shorter, more precise. Before long, half his flight was flying with their windows open. The change was immediate and electric. The rush of cold air blasted away the cockpit haze that built up during long missions. Moisture and oil residue that clung to the canopy edges were stripped clean by the gale. But the biggest improvement wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. The pilots felt sharper. That rush of freezing air cut through fatigue, and fear, snapping their minds awake at the exact moment they needed it most. In combat reports, officers began noticing the same pattern. Improved shooting performance under open-side conditions. Of course, official channels didn't like it. It went against flight regulations. Flying with the window open at 25,000 feet risked frostbite, oxygen imbalance, even loss of cabin pressure. One slip, one careless motion, and the icy wind could rip papers or maps straight out of the cockpit. But in war, rules bent to results. And the results spoke loudly. When the 56th Fighter Group, the famous Zemke's Wolf Pack, began using the trick during escort missions, their kill counts rose noticeably. Pilots who once struggled to land hits on fast-moving Focke-Wulfs suddenly found themselves scoring confirmed kills in fewer passes. Gun camera footage revealed tighter groupings, smoother tracking, and near-perfect bursts. Word spread through the Allied airfields like wildfire. The open window trick wasn't just about cutting glare anymore. It became a symbol of intuition, triumphing over machinery. The pilots were reclaiming a bit of humanity inside a machine designed to strip it away. They learned to feel the shot, not just calculate it. To sense the enemy's movement through the resistance of wind on their cheeks, through the change in sound as air whipped differently around the fuselage. For some, it became ritual. Before entering combat, they'd reach for the latch, click, slide, roar. The wind would explode into the cockpit, biting through gloves and masks. It was a brutal reminder of where they were, not above the war, but in it. Engineers eventually took notice. Tests at training bases confirmed that canopy curvature and light refraction could distort depth perception, especially in bright, cloud-reflective conditions. The solution was simple on paper: anti-glare coatings, new angles, better materials, but on the front lines, those fixes would take months to implement. The pilots didn't have months. They had the next sortie. So they kept doing it, opening their windows, freezing themselves half to death, because it worked. By late 1944, it wasn't just rumor, it was quietly encouraged among veteran flyers. Manuals never mentioned it, but flight instructors hinted at it during briefings. If you can't see your target, trust your instincts, and trust the air. Those who survived remembered the sensation vividly. One pilot later wrote, "It felt like flying without armor. The wind was raw and alive. You could smell the cordite, the fuel, the war itself, and somehow that made it easier to aim." In the brutal calculus of aerial combat, every fraction of advantage mattered. A clear view, a sharper mind, a steadier hand. Those tiny details determined who went home and who vanished into the clouds. And so, a strange ritual became legend among the fighter groups. The open window method. A rebellion against the perfection of the machine. A reminder that in the sky, clarity wasn't just about glass and instruments. It was about trust. In your instincts, in your senses, and in the raw, freezing air that carried both life and death. Then came Schweinfurt, the mission that tested everything. August 17th, 1943. The sky over Germany was a storm of death. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses lumbered toward their target, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and Regensburg. The Luftwaffe knew they were coming. Dozens of squadrons scrambled to intercept, and by the time the American formation crossed the Rhine, the sky had turned black with flak. Explosions burst like malignant flowers in the clouds, black, rolling, and violent. Fragments of steel sliced through wings and fuselages. Bombers staggered, burning, their contrails turning from white to gray to blood-red smoke. The escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts, fought to hold the line. They darted in and out of formation, their .850 caliber guns hammering at enemy fighters diving from above. But the Germans were relentless. One of those escorts was flown by Lieutenant Jack Reynolds of the 56th Fighter Group. His Thunderbolt shook violently as he dove toward a Messerschmitt that had just torn a bomber's tail clean off. The flak bursts flashed against his canopy like lightning. The glare blinded him, just for a second, and in that second the Messerschmitt slipped away. Frustration surged through him. His heart pounded, his oxygen mask fogged, his gloves slick with sweat. He couldn't see, not clearly, not through the shimmer of sun and the distortion of curved plexiglass. Then he remembered something another pilot had whispered the night before in the mess hall. "Crack your window, it'll clear your eyes." It sounded insane then. It still did now. But with the sky collapsing around him, he had nothing left to lose. Reynolds reached up, grabbed the latch beside his seat, and pulled. Instantly, a shriek of wind filled the cockpit. It was like opening a door into a hurricane. The cold slammed into him, a violent, shocking blast that made his eyes water and his teeth ache. But as the fog and reflections vanished, so did the haze in his head. Suddenly, the Messerschmitt was there again, sharp, real, framed perfectly in his gun sight. He eased the trigger. Short bursts, controlled and measured. The tracers laced across the sky, converging neatly on the German fighter. In a blink, the Messerschmitt erupted, fire and debris spiraling downward through the bomber's formation. Reynolds exhaled, his breath forming ice crystals inside his mask. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio. "You got him clean, Jack. Dead on." What he didn't know was that his gun camera was recording everything. When intelligence officers reviewed the film days later, they noticed something unusual. Reynolds's aim was unnaturally steady, his bursts tight and surgical. The analysts compared his footage to other pilots, and the difference was obvious. The canopy glare, the micro-distortion that blurred shots in so many others, was gone. The open window had fixed it. What began as a superstition, whispered in barracks and briefing tents, was now undeniable. Reports from other groups echoed the same story: clearer vision, sharper aim, higher accuracy. Cold air, it turned out, didn't just help visibility, it also reduced eye fatigue. The sudden temperature drop constricted pupils, heightening focus and contrast. The human body, in its raw reaction to freezing wind, became an instrument of precision. Soon, entire flights began quietly adopting the practice. It wasn't official. No manual ever mentioned it. But when pilots gathered before takeoff, their conversations turned to the same unspoken ritual. "Crack it open before the first burst," they'd say. "Feel the air. Let it wake you up." By winter, the trick had spread through squadrons across England, France, and Italy. You could walk through any Allied airfield before dawn and see men adjusting their gear, tightening their gloves, and tapping the canopy latch like a good luck charm. Some called it the truth window. Others just called it survival. The habit took on symbolic weight. It wasn't just about fighting glare anymore. It was about connection, about tearing down one more layer between man and machine. For every pilot who froze his face and fingers to the wind, the open canopy became a reminder of control, of feeling something real in a world that was trying to turn them into automatons. And in missions where every second mattered, where lives were measured in bursts of gunfire and oxygen supply, that difference, that split second of clarity, could decide everything. A pilot who saw first lived longer. A pilot who hit first saved dozens. Some commanders quietly began incorporating it into their unofficial advice. "Trust your instincts," they'd tell rookies. "When you can't see the target, maybe it's not the target that's wrong. Maybe it's the glass." After Schweinfurt, the open window method passed through the Air Corps like a secret religion. It wasn't in any report, but it was written into the muscle memory of every survivor who'd felt that freezing air against his cheek and lived to tell the tale. Men froze their hands to metal, cracked their windows open mid-dive, and risked everything for just a few inches more of truth. Because in the skies above Europe, in that thin blue void where death came faster than thought, clarity was everything. And sometimes, seeing clearly didn't mean trusting the instruments or the design. It meant trusting yourself. In a war decided by seconds, the smallest act of defiance, a pilot opening his window against the storm, became a weapon all its own. When the war finally ended, the skies over Europe fell silent. The contrails faded, the smoke cleared, and the sound of engines that had once shaken the heavens was replaced by something almost eerie: peace. The men who survived returned home, carrying with them habits and memories that didn't fit into civilian life. Some boxed up their uniforms, some never spoke about what they'd seen, and somewhere in that silence, one of the strangest little secrets of the air war, the open window trick, vanished into obscurity. It was never written into manuals. No training syllabus ever mentioned it. There were no engineering bulletins or after-action. In many ways, it symbolized the paradox of the Second World War itself, the collision between industrial perfection and human imperfection, between the cold precision of technology and the chaotic spark of intuition. The open window was that spark, a human heartbeat breaking through the hum of machinery. As time passed, the core lesson outlived the tactic. Later generations of pilots, jet age, missile age, digital age, never needed to slide open a window to see better. Their canopies were flawless, their instruments near perfect. But the story lingered, quietly, as part of aviation's oral history. It served as a kind of parable that sometimes the solution isn't in more precision, but in more presence. Because what those pilots discovered wasn't just a way to shoot straighter. It was a way to feel the fight, to strip away the filters and face the world as it truly was, cold, violent, unpredictable, and real. They learned that absolute control is an illusion, that clarity sometimes demands surrender, so when they opened those windows, they weren't chasing comfort or breaking rules for the thrill of it. They were reaching for something that no instrument could measure. A line between man and machine, between instinct and intellect, between chaos and clarity. And in that line lay a truth that outlasted the war, that no matter how advanced our tools become, no matter how perfect the design, it's still the human behind the controls who makes the impossible shot, who feels the difference between panic and precision. They opened their windows not to defy orders, but to remind themselves that they were alive, fragile, flawed, yet capable of something the machines never could: instinct. It existed only in the memories of those who used it, a ghost tactic, passed from veteran to rookie in the quiet before takeoff, scribbled in margins of logbooks, or shared in the dim light of base canteens between coffee, fear, and exhaustion. "Crack your window before the dive," they'd say. "Feel the air. Trust the cold." And for those who tried it, it became more than a trick. It became a ritual. They called it flying by feel. But those words meant something deeper than they sounded. In an age when machines were beginning to dictate the terms of survival, flying by feel was rebellion. A reminder that technology could not replace instinct, that no sight, scope, or instrument could substitute for the human pulse beating behind the stick. The war had been fought by numbers, speed, altitude, kill ratios. Yet up there, inside that trembling cockpit, survival came down to something far more primitive: the ability to sense, to adapt, to feel the world beyond the dials. For many of the pilots, opening that window wasn't about physics anymore. It was about connection. The blast of freezing air, the sting of frost on their skin, the roar of the sky tearing past. It reminded them that they were still human. Machines dulled the senses, but the cold brought everything back: the heartbeat, the breath, the awareness of being alive. It stripped away the illusions of distance, of control. It was dangerous, irrational, and deeply personal, and somehow it made them better. Years later, when veterans gathered at reunions or air shows, they spoke of it like folklore. A quiet grin would spread as one mentioned it, and another would nod, remembering. "Yeah," they'd say, "I did that too. Froze my face half to death, but hell, I could see everything." It was a small thing, a flick of a latch, a gust of air, but it represented something vast, the refusal to surrender completely to the machine. Because sometimes, to truly see, to cut through the glare and the noise and the false reflections, you have to do the unthinkable. You have to open the window. You have to let the storm in. In the end, the story of the open window isn't just about flying. It's about the human spirit. In a war ruled by steel, calculation, and machinery, a few men dared to trust something far older than technology: their instincts. They faced the sky not as machines of war, but as living, breathing souls. And in that freezing wind, they found clarity. Because sometimes the greatest precision doesn't come from the instruments in front of us, but from the courage to feel what's real. If stories like this move you, stories of courage, innovation, and the human heartbeat inside the machinery of war, then make sure to subscribe. Every week, we bring forgotten moments of World War II back to life. One decision, one heartbeat, one open window at a time. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the human side of history, where every detail tells a story, and every story reminds us why it mattered.